Hi, my name is William Steck. The two standards that I have chosen to look at are Illinois standards, social science, history, ninth through 12th grade standards. And here they are. I have chosen from these two standards social science, history, 7.912, identify the role of individual groups and institutions in people's struggle for safety, equality, and justice. I chose this standard because I think it is important for the students to be able to identify the roles of individual people, individual groups, and institutions during the civil rights movement. Some of the big ideas, key concepts, and details for this standard are: students got to identify key people, groups, and institutions that participated in the civil rights movement. And students will be able to identify how the civil rights movement affected people's lives today. Here are some of more key ideas, concepts, and details. Students will be able to identify the different laws that come about because of the civil rights movement. And students will be able to see how some of the main people in the civil rights movement are still active today. Some of the skills students must use are: identify. Students will be able to identify the different peoples, groups, institutions that were part of the civil rights movement. Explain. Students will be able to explain the roles that the different people, groups, and institutions played in the civil rights movement. Some other skills the students must use are analyze. Students will be able to analyze the different people, groups, and institutions of the civil rights movement and see how effective they were in the movement. Evaluate. Students will be able to evaluate how effective the different people, groups, and institutions were in the civil rights movement. I have two activities for the students to work on to help them with these skills. The first project is a project-based approach to the American Civil Rights Movement. It is called the Preliminary Project Organization of the Civil Rights. In this project, the students will work in groups to explore, evaluate, write about, and present the work of one of three civil rights organizations: SNCC, CORE, or the SCLC. Each group receives a packet of primary and secondary sources detailing these organizations' approaches and tactics, which they will use to construct and write newspaper articles and editorials explaining and taking stances on the relative success of protests, including the sit-ins, freedom rides, and the March of Selma. The second activity will be an activity about the March on Washington. The first part will be the who and how of the March on Washington. Put students in small groups and give them copies of two documents: the final plans of the March on Washington for jobs and freedom, and the program for March on Washington for jobs and freedom. Have the students do a scavenger hunt and answer the questions on the worksheet. March on Washington's primary documents. In the second part, it's called What We Demand, the Goals of the March on Washington. Pass out the worksheet. I will pass out the worksheet. The goals on March on Washington for jobs of freedom. What did they hope to accomplish? I will then ask the students to read through the goals and have them keep in mind the obstacles African Americans faced up to that point in 1963. Ask them to think about and answer the following questions on their worksheets. I will tell the students to answer the questions on the worksheets. Have the students read through the goals from the march. Then ask them to try to imagine what the authors of the goals had hoped would happen if the goals were met. Have them write down the answers and the appropriate anticipated effects. The final two questions will be ask students to put a check next to any goal that they feel has been met since 1963 up to 2016. The student should answer the rest of the questions on the page. Okay, assessments for students mastering of the standards. In project one, I will pass out a rubric for the newspaper articles. I will also pass out a rubric for the group presentation. And I will make sure that I go over the rubrics. My assessments for the second project will be, first, I will monitor the students as they go through the scavenger hunt and answer the questions to make sure that they get them, the questions on the worksheet to make sure that they get them right. Second, I will go over the students' answers on